Hello, this is Lo Sontag, and this is Civil Democracy and the U.S. Constitution. This is Class 1. Last week, we got a little bit of an introduction. This week, we're going to go into the Constitution, but we're not going to go into the meat and bones of the Constitution. We're going to go into the why of the Constitution. Why was it written? What was the point? Who were the people who created it, and why did they create it? And why should we be studying it? I hope that this informs you, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment in the comments. As always, I'll put the citations not only in the description, but I'll try to put them on the screen when possible. All right, so let's get to it. The Philadelphia Convention, Power, Compromise, and the Unfinished Revolution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, these iconic words penned in the sweltering summer of 1787 in Philadelphia were not just a gathering of founders, it was a collision of ideals. The Federal Convention, later mythologized as the Constitutional Convention, was in many ways America's first existential crisis. Delegates arrived under the pretense of revising the floundering Articles of Confederation, a system so fractured that it left Congress begging states for funds like a debtor nation. But men like Madison, Hamilton, and Franklin had grander designs. Their mission: to forge a centralized authority, a more perfect union that balanced Enlightenment ideals with the cold realities of power. Unconvention by any other name. Why the confusion over its title? Because probably when you're in school, you've heard them call it many things: the Federal Convention, the Grand Convention, the Federal Convention. Well, to contemporaries, it was the Federal Convention or the Grand Convention at Philadelphia. Labels emphasizing its Federalist ambitions. The term Constitutional Convention emerged later, retroactively, sanctifying its output. This was no accident. Language shapes perceptions, and framing the event as a singular constitutional moment obscured its contentious origins, which was a coup by parchment against the Article's decentralized order. So let's go over some definitions. Enumerate means list items individually, to name a number of things on a list one by one, to count how many things there are in something. Enumerated powers is a political power specifically delegated to a governmental branch by a constitution. That's by U.S. legal. Ratify, sign or formal consent, a treaty, a contract, an agreement making officially valid. Contemporary, living at the time. So when I say contemporary, I want you to understand that I mean those people living in the 1700s, 1787. When I say contemporary, not contemporary now. So it just means living at the time that we're discussing the topic. Civil liberty, freedom from arbitrary interference in one's pursuits by individuals or by the government. Liberty, a state of freedom, especially as opposed to a political subjugation, imprisonment, or slavery. Its two most general recognition divisions are political and civil liberty. Federalism, a mode of political organizations that unites separate states or other polities within an overreaching political system in a way that allows each to maintain its own integrity. Virginia Conventions. The thing is, the reason I'm kind of giving you the definition for Virginia Conventions is because a lot of times when you're in class and you're learning about like civics or the Constitution, you'll hear them talk about these Virginia Conventions, and you're like, are they talking about the convention right now or some other convention? Well, There were the Virginia Convention, and there were actually 4 assemblies of delegates elected for the purpose of establishing constitutions of fundamental law for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So this is, and then there was a 5th convention, also known as the Revolutionary Convention, which met also in Virginia, but in Williamsburg, and it met from May 6th to July 7th, 1776. It elected Pendleton its presiding officer after his return as president from the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. There were 3 parties in the 5th convention. The first was mainly made up of wealthy planters. The second was made up of intellectuals and included a younger Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. And the third was a minority of young men, mainly from Western Virginia, which was led by Patrick Henry. And also the Constitution, which I gave you the definition last week, but I'm going to go over it again. A constitution is a set of fundamental rules that determine how a country or state is run. Almost all constitutions are codified, which, as I told you before, just simply means written down clearly in a specific document called the Constitution. So that's kind of like those terms that, they're very important for you to know while we go over this topic. Let's go over some dates next. The first Virginia Convention was held August 4th, 1774. The 5th Revolutionary Convention was held May 6th, 1776. The Constitutional Convention was held May 25th through September 17th in 1787. The Articles of Confederation were created on November 15th, 1777, and then ratified in 1781 and ended on March 4th, 1789. The U.S. Constitution was created on September 17th, 1787, ratified on June 21st, 1788, and went into effect on March 4th, 1789. The Ghost of Virginia. I explained there were 5 conventions. The Philadelphia Gathering was the 6th in a series of revolutionary conventions. Virginia's earlier conventions or assemblies were steeped in Enlightenment, philosophy, and frontier radicalism, and it set the stage. The 5th Virginia Convention, 1776, birthed Jefferson's Declaration of Rights, a radical text declaring all men are by nature created equal. Where the framers and architects, were they architects or were they oligarchs? Were the people who wrote the Constitution a bunch of rich dudes that just wanted to protect their stuff? That's a good question. In 1776, as they lined up in Philadelphia to sign the Declaration of Independence, the founders attested quite literally to its final words: "We pledge our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor." So, this is a good question. The Philadelphia delegates were neither saints nor mere plutocrats. They were pragmatists. What exactly were their fortunes? A little over a century ago, Columbia University professor Charles Beard, and a lot of people quote him, asserted that all the founders were rich and in it for the money. That's pretty cynical, but does Beard's analysis hold up in the light of modern investigation using financial records he did not possess? Let's discuss some of the players. The primary authors of the Constitution were James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. They wrote a series of anonymous essays known as the Federalist Papers in order to build support for the Constitution and to provide a clear explanation of its principles. So here are some short biographies. John Jay had a significant contribution to the Constitution. We don't hear about him much, and maybe because he never became president. I'm not quite sure. I'm just guessing. He was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States in 1789. He negotiated the Jay Treaty with Great Britain in 1794, and he was finally elected the governor of New York in 1797. He was one of the leaders of the Federalist Party. Jay felt strongly that the only way the country could survive on an international stage was to appear as one united entity, not as a league of states. He knew that getting support for a strong federal government would not be easy, but it would be necessary. In 1787, Jay was authored the Federalist Papers because there were a bunch of essays, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 64. He got sick around the fifth one, so that's why it's such that big gap. Okay, next guy is James Madison, the father of the Constitution. He was 4'10" and 100 pounds, an intellectual who championed federalism to curb state-level tyranny of the majority. Yet his Virginia plan favored large slave-holding states. Next, there's Alexander Hamilton, an immigrant born in poverty, envisioned a mercantile empire with a president for life. His vision of clashed with agrarian skeptics. Then there was Governor Morris. He wasn't a governor, that's just his name. A patrician wordsmith. He penned the Constitution's soaring preamble while fighting to protect property rights. Then there was Ben Franklin, one of my favorites, the elder statesman, brokered the Great Compromise. He played an important role in creating the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise was a solution where both large and small states would be fairly represented by creating two houses of Congress. Franklin favored a strong national government and argued that framers should trust the judgment of the people. Yet, absent, a lot of people think Thomas Jefferson was at that convention. He was not. He was in Paris, and a lot of grassroots radicals weren't there. So the result of this document, it was ratified not by direct democracy, but it was ratified by a convention, which was a calculated move to kind of like bypass populist dissent. But one thing Thomas Jefferson did get managed is he did get Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. But again, we're going to talk about that later on. Some voices also had more say than they should have, such as Governor of Virginia, Patrick Henry. Henry was an anti-federalist, which is like states' rights in the 1700s. He shaped the Second Amendment. He is famously known for his declaration at the Second Virginia Convention, "Give me liberty or give me death." He was an attorney, a planner, a politician, an evangelical pastor, an orator, and an enslaver of African people. He enslaved people, bought people, sold people, traded people until his death. He was at one point the largest enslaver in Virginia. He died owning 67 enslaved people. So, talking about slavery. Slavery was the rock beneath the foundation. The Constitution's genius was also its original sin. Enslavers like George Washington, and Henry ensured protections for human bondage. The 3/5 clause, the fugitive slave mandates, and a 20-year grace period on the transatlantic slave trade. These were not mere compromises, but betrayals of the revolution's promise. And as someone like Noam Chomsky might argue, the framers constructed a system where property rights, including human property, were enshrined while civil liberty remained conditional. Federalism. We're going to talk about that. A double-edged sword. The Constitution's enumerated powers and federalist structure were designed to check centralized tyranny. Yet, they also entrenched state-level oppression, wielding states' rights to defend slavery, while northern elites leveraged commerce clauses to build industrial capitalism. The anti-federalists, led by Henry, warned of this duality, fearing a distant government unaccountable to local communities. Is it a living document? Is the Constitution a living document or a shield for power? The framers knew their work was imperfect. Franklin admitted, "I consent to the Constitution because I expect no better." Yet, its amendability, seen in the Bill of Rights, the abolition of slavery, the 13th Amendment, the suffrage expansion, allowed it to evolve. But evolution requires struggle. The U.S. Constitution is a verb, not a noun, which means it not merely is a relic of the history, but a living, breathing charter that shapes our daily lives, and those with good faith read it in terms of its spirit, not literally. Were the founders self-interested? In Charles Beard's book, we reference him a lot here, most influential book, An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, was written in 1913. Beard's thesis that the framers acted to protect their wealth holds partial truths, but partial. Many were creditors, land speculators, and or enslavers. Yet figures like Hamilton and Franklin also harbored visionary ideals, drawing from Locke, Montesquieu, and even the Iroquois Confederacy. The Constitution was born both a capitalist charter and a radical experiment, a tension that defines U.S. politics. The Constitution is an unfinished revolution. The 1787 Convention did not create a democracy. It recreated a Republican framework, flawed, exclusionary, yet malleable. Its legacy is not in the parchment, but in the movements that forced it to bend. Abolitionists, suffragists, civil rights activists, unionists. Today, as polarization and autocratic threats loom, the Constitution remains a battleground. Will it serve the oligarchy or democracy? The answer, as always, lies not in Philadelphia's hollowed halls, but in the streets and in we the people. So why should we save this, the Constitution? Why should we make an effort to save this flawed document? First off, it's worked pretty well, despite everything. Second off, I have a feeling of what comes next, and we're not ready. Let us apply chaos theory to what would happen in a violent revolution in the U.S. in its current state. Chaos theory states that you can predict the next organized state by looking at the location of power next to the unorganized chaos. The attractors will be and will define the next structure. And in the case of our current socio-political economic system, corporations will be the attractors that our system will coalesce around for foundations and structure. A revolution now with the left, progressives, and moderates in its completely unorganized state, and the right in a well-organized state, will lead to an even more oppressive situation for the people. It will not be the revolution for the general public to throw our Constitution and institutions in the trash. It will be a terrible reaction that enslaves us. It will lead to an even greater class divide. A revolution today will end with people being swooped up by right-wing private security forces and oppressed by an even more right-wing government funded by capitalism. A revolution of the enslaved and exploited United States public would be the kind of disorganization that the right-wing forces need to clamp down on even more people. Remember, the U.S. in its current state is violent and efficient in oppressing people by imprisoning them, torturing them, and killing them. Any hand-to-hand combat in the current day United States will lead to people not on the right losing. The order in which we will obtain freedom: 1. Recognize people are not free. 2. Free people. And 3. We'll figure that out. But that has to be the order. Making people more oppressed to create a better fighting scenario is going to fail. We cannot create a new world until we free ourselves from the chains in this one. And the Constitution, in my opinion, is a key to freedom, not a lock. This is Lo Sontag with Civil Democracy and the U.S. Constitution. Hope to see you next week.